remember vividly the morning when Adolf came into the world, even though so many years have passed and time insists on blurring the contours of my memory. It was April, and Braunau seemed wrapped in a light mist that turned the houses into shy silhouettes, as if the whole village were breathing cautiously that dawn. The bedroom window was half open, letting in a thread of fresh air mixed with the smell of bread baking at the bakery on the corner. It was in that quiet setting that my son opened his eyes for the first time. Clara, with her delicate hands and her gaze always so serene, held the baby like someone cradling a precious secret. I approached slowly, more out of insecurity than humility. Men of my generation were not raised for tenderness. We were shaped by discipline. Even so, in that moment, seeing Adolf so small, so silent, I felt my shoulders give way slightly. But what marked me most was his gaze. He did not cry out loudly, like other newborns. He just opened his eyes, as if examining the world before accepting it. It was a gaze far too deep for a child, a look that inspired awe and doubt at the same time. I didn't know what to think, so I told myself it was just my imagination. Although, deep down, I knew it wasn't. In his early years, life in Braunau followed a quiet rhythm. The house we lived in was small, made of old wood that creaked in the wind, but to us, it represented stability. In the yard, there was a crooked tree that always seemed to be fighting the cold, and Adolf used to play under its shade, watching insects, leaves, little stones, everything with an intensity I saw only in him. While other children ran around aimlessly, he stayed still, almost contemplative. I was always a rigid man. I grew up without luxuries, fighting for every small achievement, and so I believed my children should learn discipline from an early age. I did not quite understand Adolf's way, that sensitivity almost disconnected from the world's expectations. When I tried to teach him something practical, he would avert his eyes, lost in thought. When I scolded him, he didn't cry. He just went quiet, as if building walls inside himself. Clara said he had inherited her imagination. I would answer that imagination doesn't sustain a household. She would smile, a sad yet calm smile, and I understood that argument would never have an end. There were moments, however, when Adolf seemed like any other boy. He liked to walk with me to the bridge over the inn, though he didn't say much along the way. He held my hand firmly, but his eyes were always fixed on the current, as if trying to follow it wherever it might go. I would ask what he saw there, and he would answer, "What comes before and what comes after?" I laughed because I didn't understand. He laughed too, perhaps at my laughter, perhaps at himself. The house, despite its simplicity, was full of sounds. The hurried footsteps of the siblings, Clara's songs, the cracking of the wood at dusk. But Adolf had a strange relationship with silence. Sometimes I would find him standing in the middle of the room, motionless, as if listening to something only he could hear. I asked what he was doing, and he would answer, "Waiting." I never knew for what, and he never explained. When he turned 6, my profession demanded our first big move. Adolf did not take the news well. He cried softly, not out of stubbornness, but out of attachment. He said the house knew him, that the walls knew his secrets. Impatient, I dismissed it. Today, when I revisit that scene in my memory, I realize that perhaps he was trying to tell me something deeper, that he felt the world slipping from his hands every time we moved. We left Braunau on a gray day, with the river shining like a blade under the overcast sky. Adolf turned back to the house several times as we walked away, like someone saying goodbye to a dear friend. Clara tried to distract the child, but he remained serious, holding a small stone he had picked up in the yard. "To remember," he said. I just nodded. I did not imagine then that that would be the first of many farewells that would shape my son's childhood. Farewells to places, to people, to fragments of belonging. Each move would leave a silent mark on him, which I, with my hardness, did not know how to see. But in that moment, all I saw was a boy too sensitive for the world, and a father unable to translate into affection what he called responsibility. And perhaps that is what hurts most when I remember, not what happened, but what I failed to understand. The new town did not receive us with celebration, nor with hostility, only with indifference. It was a bigger place, with more movement, more noise, more unfamiliar faces. The streets always seemed busy, and voices blended into a confusion of accents and calls. For me, accustomed to dealing with bureaucracy and relocations, it was just another point on the map of my career. For Adolf, it was as if someone had torn up the roots he had barely begun to grow. In the first days, he walked around the house like someone moving through a borrowed place. He observed the walls, the windows, the floor, as if trying to negotiate a silent pact with that strange space. There was no longer the crooked tree in the Braunau yard, nor the familiar smell of the bakery on the corner. There were other sounds, other smells, other rhythms, and my son seemed suspicious of them all. The school was a few streets away, a solid, cold building, with high windows and corridors echoing with footsteps. I remember the first morning I took him there. He held my hand with less firmness than before. It wasn't exactly fear. It was a kind of resignation, as if he already knew that. Once again, he would have to start from scratch. When we reached the gate, the other children were running in groups, laughing loudly, shoving one another, trading jibes that ended in laughter. Adolf stood still for a moment, watching everything with that old analytical look I already knew. He didn't ask anything. He didn't complain. He just took a deep breath. "You'll get used to it," I said, trying to be firm, but feeling doubt cut through my voice. "The new house doesn't know who I am yet," he replied, looking down. "And neither do they." I had no answer for that. I only walked with him to the classroom door, where the teacher received him with an appraising look, the same look adults use when they measure a child by posture, clothing, and silence. The first school reports were confusing. Some teachers said he was intelligent, with above-average curiosity, especially in history and reading. Others called him inattentive, distracted, rebellious in small things. He forgot books, got lost in drawings, took too long to complete simple tasks. I, as the rigid father I was, listened more to the criticism than to the praise. At home, however, I saw another side of my son. At night, he drew by the faint light of a lamp. They weren't childish figures. They were houses, churches, bridges, entire streets. Sometimes he added tiny human figures, almost invisible, as if the world he imagined were made first of structures and only then of people. When he showed them to me, I saw only a pastime. Today, I realized they were windows from the inside out. There were also his siblings, each of them reacting to the new town in their own way. Some adapted better, quickly finding friends, joining the street games. Adolf, on the other hand, seemed to float on the margins. It wasn't that he was shunned. On the contrary, many children tried to approach him, curious about that boy with the attentive eyes. But he chose with extreme care whom to relate to, and most of the time he preferred his own company. It was around then that the first darker shadow approached our family. One of the younger brothers fell ill. At first, we thought it would be something brief, like so many fevers that come and go. But the cough lingered, his body weakened, and our days began to revolve around medicine. Doctor visits, nights broken by muffled groans. Clara stretched herself thin between caring for the sick child and keeping the house running. I, powerless, tried to believe that work and routine would keep us standing. Adolf, however, seemed to feel the gravity of the situation in a different way. He approached his brother with a gentleness I did not expect. He brought him water, adjusted his pillow, told small improvised stories. He spoke of castles, of faraway places, of skies that changed color according to people's moods. It was his tender side, the one he hid from the world, but which emerged naturally in the presence of the fragility of someone he loved. When the illness won, our house fell silent in a way no move had ever caused. The small room became too tidy, too still. The favorite toy, forgotten on the chair, seemed to expose our lack of answers. Clara cried softly, a handkerchief clenched in her hands. I took refuge in appointments and reports, trying to believe that rigidity was a form of resistance. Adolf, however, did not cry in front of me. He spent days walking through the house with light, almost invisible steps, as if he didn't want to disturb the emptiness that had settled in. At night he would sit by the window, staring into the darkness as if waiting for his brother to return from there. Once, I asked what he was doing there. "I'm listening," he answered. "Listening to what, Adolf?" I insisted, tired, perhaps irritated by his lack of an outburst. "To what doesn't come back." His words cut me, but I swallowed them like I swallowed so many other things. I didn't know how to deal with that sensitivity that seemed at the same time beautiful and dangerous. At school, after the loss, the teachers noticed the change. They said he was even more distracted, more distant. But interestingly, in certain lessons, he shone as never before. When the topic was homeland, borders, identity, he lit up. He asked too many questions, wanted to know why a piece of land was called this or that name, why some people belonged here and others there. I attributed it to his age, to a questioning phase. Perhaps it was more than that. I tried to bring him back in line with the methods I knew, demands, reprimands, expectations. When I saw him lost in drawings, I called him back to reality. When he spent too much time staring out the window, I sent him to study. My intention, I swear, was to protect him from a world that does not forgive distraction. But without realizing it, I pushed him a little farther from me with each command. Clara, with her sweet, tired gaze, would sometimes lay a light hand on my arm and say, "He feels more than he shows." "We all feel, Clara," I would answer, "but we can't live ruled by it." "Maybe he can't live any other way," she would murmur. Between a school that found him undisciplined, a home that carried grief, and the constant moves that forced him to start over again and again, Adolf became a boy who didn't fit anywhere. A little foreign in every city, a little strange in every classroom, a little distant even within himself. And I, his father, instead of being a harbor, was often just another border. It wasn't malice, it was ignorance. And perhaps that is the heaviest guilt a father can carry. Adolf's adolescence arrived the way some storms do. First with a light wind, almost imperceptible, and then with an unexpected weight that changes the air in the house. He grew quickly, becoming taller, thinner, with a face that always seemed burdened with thoughts no one could reach. He was no longer the silent child who drew in secret. Now he was a restless youth, full of convictions, his own ideas, deep doubts, and above all, a sensitivity that seemed too large for his body. I tried to maintain discipline. I believed that, with firmness, I would lead him to the right path, the one I knew, the only one that seemed safe to me. I wanted him to become a civil servant, to have a steady salary, to never go through the hardships I had known as a child. But he rebelled against that as one rebels against an invisible prison. What moved him most was art. He spent hours drawing, studying forms, copying facades of old buildings, creating impossible structures that seemed to blend dream and architecture. I saw talent there, but I also saw danger. Art, to my eyes, was not a profession, it was a distraction. He, however, spoke of it as if it were nourishment. I remember one particularly cold night. I had come home late from work, exhausted, and when I walked into his room, I found the table covered with drawings. There were cathedrals, bridges, palaces, entire streets, as he imagined they should be. Adolf was sitting there, his face lit only by the flickering flame of the lamp. "You didn't study what I asked," I said, holding the stack of papers. He looked at me with a mixture of defiance and sadness. "I did study, Father. Just not what you wanted me to." Those words hit me like an uncomfortable confession. He did not shout, did not cry, did not beg. He simply stated it, with a calm that irritated me more than any childish tantrum. We then began a period of silent distance. He would leave home early, often before I woke, and spend long hours walking around the city. Sometimes I saw him from afar, standing in front of old buildings, observing every detail as if he were in front of a living work of art. At other times, he vanished into libraries, devouring books on history, architecture, and biographies of leaders and artists. I tried to call him back. "Adolf, you need to think about the future." He would answer, "I am thinking about it, Father. The problem is that you have one future in mind, and I have another." I didn't know how to deal with that. Clara's illness worsened during that time, making our days even heavier. She tried to keep the house in order, but her body no longer responded with the same strength. Adolf spent long periods by her side, offering comfort with the same tenderness he had shown when his brother died. There was a bond between the two of them that I never managed to reach, a silent, almost sacred understanding. I loved her, but didn't know how to show it. Adolf loved her in a way that seemed to go beyond words. Sometimes, that made me feel like an intruder in my own home. When things became more serious, I began to realize that he feared losing her more than he feared anything else in the world. One night, I found him sitting at the foot of her bed, holding the corner of the sheet. The tears running down his face were silent. He didn't even notice I was there. "She can't go," he murmured. "She's the only one who understands me." I felt the weight of that sentence like a blow I wasn't expecting. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. The distance between us, in that moment, felt vast and definitive. When Clara died, something in Adolf broke irreversibly. He spent days without speaking to me, wandering through the house like a shadow. His drawings, once so frequent, disappeared. His notebook lay closed on the table, gathering dust. The lamp that had lit his creations remained unlit. One afternoon, I tried to approach him. "Adolf, I know it hurts," I murmured. He raised his head, his eyes red but dry. "No, Father, you don't." I backed away. Perhaps because, for the first time, I realized he was right. It was after that loss that he decided to apply to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. I hesitated, but there was an urgency inside him that I no longer had the strength to suppress. He believed that there he would find his place, something that would give meaning to what he carried within. I accompanied him to the station. He was thin, worn, but with a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. A fragile spark, but alive. "I'm going to make it, Father," he said, holding his suitcase. "I know I am." I wanted to hug him, but I couldn't. I only placed a hand on his shoulder. "I hope so, son." He boarded the train without looking back. I stayed on the platform, watching the smoke drift away, imagining that this was a turning point, perhaps one of healing, perhaps of rupture. I did not know I was saying goodbye to the boy, and that when the train disappeared, I would never again see that childlike gaze. The day Adolf left for Vienna should have been just another milestone in the life of a young man in search of his path. That is how many fathers view a son's departure, as a natural stage, almost predictable. But for me, that train carried something I didn't know how to name. Perhaps the last part of his childhood, perhaps the chance for us to repair what we had never managed to build together. After he disappeared into the train's smoke, I walked back home with heavy steps. The landscape seemed different, broader and yet emptier. Clara was no longer there to receive me. Her absence still lingered through the rooms like a faded perfume, an echo of life that would never return. And now, with Adolf gone, the house became just a space of wood and walls, without the sounds that had once filled mornings and nights. For weeks, I lived between short letters and a strange feeling of waiting without knowing for what. The first messages I received from Adolf were brief, but carried a spark of hope. He wrote that he studied, drew, walked around the city, observing buildings and people. He seemed enchanted by Vienna, its lights, its theaters, its grand architecture. He said everything there seemed to beg to be drawn. I remember one particular sentence he wrote. "Father, here I feel the world speaking to me." I don't know why, but that sentence left me uneasy. Perhaps because I realized he was finding far from me what he had sought all through his childhood. Then came the letter that changed everything. It was longer than the others, written in a nervous, almost shaky handwriting. Adolf had been rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts. He had sent his drawings, his projects, his dreams, and received not just a no, but a definitive no, with the assertion that he lacked technique. He couldn't understand it. Neither could I. But life, as so often, is indifferent to what we feel. The letter said, "They didn't see who I can be, Father. They didn't see anything." I recognized in that the echo of all the times he had felt misunderstood, at school, in the moves, in his losses. I saw the wound I myself had helped to deepen with my harshness. I wanted to answer at once, to comfort him, to say there were other paths. But the words didn't come. I spent hours sitting at the table, pen in hand, trying to write something that wouldn't sound empty. In the end, I wrote, "Come back home, Adolf. This is still your place." But he did not come back. The letters that followed were more spaced out, shorter, as if he were slowly drifting away not only from me but from himself. He wrote of financial hardship, nights in shelters, days wandering the city, trying to sell small drawings. He also wrote of confused thoughts, of anguish, of a constant feeling of being on the margins of everything. I read each word with a growing weight in my chest, asking myself where I had failed, where I had let him slip away before he fell into that emptiness. I wanted to help him, but my health began to decline. The doctor said my heart was weak, that I needed rest. But how could I rest when the world seemed to be collapsing inside me? One night, as I tried to climb the stairs at home, I felt a sudden sharp pain. I sat on the step, out of breath, while the house seemed to spin. I thought of calling someone, but the house was far too empty. I thought of Clara, and for the first time I truly understood how much her absence meant. I thought of Adolf, of that boy who watched rivers, who drew dreams, who had asked me so many questions I never knew how to answer. Hours later, I managed to stand up. I walked to the table where I kept Adolf's letters and spread them out before me. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I had never assembled. I saw a sensitive boy, then a fragmented adolescent, then a young man searching for a place in the world as if searching for air. And I saw, above all, the space between the words, the space where I should have been. I wrote one last letter and never knew whether it reached him. It said, "Son, life is hard, but not an enemy. Do not let the world harden you. You feel in a way few people do. Use that, and know that, even without knowing how to show it, I have always wanted what was best for you." I signed it with trembling hands. I sent it the next day. After that, I received no reply. Maybe he never read it. Maybe he read it too late. I don't know. My body began to fail little by little. Days grew heavy, nights long. On my last morning of lucidity, I remember looking out the window. The sky was cloudy, but a small ray of light slipped between the clouds. Faint, yet stubborn. I thought of Adolf. I thought of the boy who held my hand on the riverbank. I thought of the young man who boarded the train to Vienna with dreams larger than he could carry. And I realized something I had never clearly understood. I did not lose my son all at once. I lost him bit by bit, at each move, at each silence, at each word I failed to say. And when the train took Adolf away, I was already saying goodbye to a boy whom the world, and I, had never known how to shelter. The silence that remained after my departure is not only the silence of death, it is the silence of everything that could have been said, and never was.